Thank you and good morning. I appreciate the long lead in there. I feel that if I make it the 5-minute mark, it's easy for those who choose to skip forward to skip forward. I use it as a great filter, if you will, to just engage with people who are looking to slow down the pace of their life. Of course, we mostly come to digital entertainment as a way to be sidetracked. Arguably it's because everything in our life has such a level of pace. It's already too much for us. So a little bit of Australian bird song, if you will. I believe I've got the microphone set to point directly at me. It should pick up a bit more background now. Well, I've got little to say at the start of this video. might have it on this wider pickup angle. I've sort of been noticing a theme to the 30-minute long videos of late. That I think it was like the redone Simpsons cartoons after about 20 years. They seem to play out like 3 10-minute shortish stories per episode. But to me it was a mark that the pace of living had sped up, and that was what was required for engagement for a stressed out class, you know, for all the people that would sit down to watch The Simpsons at their dinner time, or I don't know when it played. It certainly felt like it was the more fitting time frames, more chewable, more digestible. I can just shoot through that gap there. Alright. There really is some amazing sounds going on around me right now. This truly is a wonderful place to be. I just feel this morning that my cat wouldn't let me be in bed. So here we are. It's nature that the universe, a higher power or our higher selves, communing with our spirit groups going all the way back or forward in time of course only being relevant to we on this plane of existence, being what separates everything from all happening at the same moment. At a different level of reality it might play out a little bit differently, but this nature of being in the right place at the right time, I've always felt is a large part of what is reassuring about there being some form of divine intelligence, or some nature of us having a higher self that even in probably our less than ideal times in life, the single set of footprints, so to speak, where we're being carried rather than feeling that we need to be communing. Apologies here. Bug just flew into my eye. My right eye, if anyone cares. I certainly wasn't trying to mock divine presence, belittle the nature of our need to engage conscientiously. But I do feel that, or it's been my experience, I suppose, if I was trying to be a scientist, if I was trying to debunk it, I'm trying to gain greater understanding of it. I think I was quite resolute by the time I was in my, let's say, middle teenage years. I think that's a little bit of an ego boast, but certainly by the age of 16 I'd come to realise that holism, that is, everything is connected, was a foundating part to what I considered the magical universe. And I certainly needed some magic in my life. I suppose I'd grown up in Sydney, in the city and the country. I'd alternated between a young mother who'd left home at probably 16 years of age herself, and had an interesting life. I guess typical to any teenager that leaves home early. Probably a range of problems, and not to do with the direct family members. Well, arguably, she went to Al-Anon support groups, I think, because her father or my grandfather had been a heavy alcoholic through that stage of living, and the impact that then has on her older siblings, who might have taken more than they could chew as a way to protect the young daughter, the young sister. And it's just the generational cycle, if you will, that I'd grown up under a child who'd left home early. And I chose not to have children until I was a bit further along in my lifetime. But I'm not all over the place here. I'm just trying to give some basis to, I guess, the hook that pulled me out of the thing that gave me my solid foundation that I needed to go forward when I was 16 years of age. And I certainly needed something to give me faith, or I needed something greater than myself to believe in. Because at that stage in life I'd resolutely deemed that the only reason I could see for me to go on living was in the potential benefit I could bring to my sister, who around about that time, I think her father had passed. A person who had been one of the great leading men of my life. I guess generationally it's interesting because my grandfather, the same one that might have set my mother up to suffer, apparently. So just to deal with that before we go forward, is that my mum actually spent her entire life blaming her mum for not getting out of there, not understanding, I guess, in that stage in history that the support networks for a woman leaving a marriage was very different to the times that she might have grown up in. She didn't see things, I guess, with the adult lens or a mature lens that might have been relevant, might have been closer to reality of the times. But that her father was one of the most softly spoken, most sweetest men I'd ever met. And his consideration towards others is the motivation that allowed me to develop what I considered my male persona. Combined with my sister's father, who I considered, I guess, more a friend. I guess by age he was closer to me. There was sort of like a 10-year age difference between my mother and my sister's dad. And there was about a 10-year age difference between myself and my sister's dad, and then there was about a 10-year age difference between myself and my sister. Thereabouts, nothing specific there. But it allowed there to be great family binds. We could engage with ways in, I could play soccer, arguably, with my stepdad, if you will. But I'll refer to him as my father figure. I don't mean to have any disrespect towards my father. It was only actually on my nan's passing in the last months of her life that she actually said that she'd kind of ponied up the money to potentially beat my father in court or to take ownership of me. And for me, I mean, that as much as my nan was passing it, I was being her carer at that stage, and I certainly didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable. I kind of needed to leave the room at that point. It wasn't to be emotional. It was probably to be emotional, but to be emotional elsewhere. And then to just sort of digest that, because as far as I could figure, I'd been raised by my mother, and that wasn't an upbringing that... I mean, if we say, would you choose it again, the answer typically most people say regarding going through a life of pain is that yes, they would, because they wouldn't be the person who they are today if they hadn't experienced the things they had experienced. But the point of my story, I'm trying to be a half-decent storyteller here, and I'm trying to go back to an earlier stage. It really comes down to my theme of late, where I've been saying, well, if you give an idiot a microphone, you wind up with dialogues a bit like this. So I guess in the interest of gaining a wider audience, I basically have zero audience for my channel. Arguably, I don't have a channel. And so it's like, well, what is relevant? And for me, it's the human aspect. For me, it's about being a conscientious consumer. It's about right living, and living in accordance with our planet in ways that are sustainable, just so that our future generations have something that they can ideally inherit, or a safe world to live in. And this will get to be the reason that this video is to the forefront today, is that I've actually had one of the harder days of my life, and when I woke up I actually just wanted to roll over and go back to sleep, because I found it very difficult to get to sleep last night. I was in quite a tumultuous state, where arguably a pain state, and it came down to, I suppose I didn't have the handbook for living. I didn't arguably know what is the healthiest way to deal with profound news that really hurt me, and arguably needing sleep. Sometimes you just need to, shut down to it, I would say. And so I managed to crash out, but I also managed to wake up in the wee hours of the morning for reasons I'm not sure, possibly multiple times. And so when I finally was awoken by the cat again, I'm realising my mic is set too high. Hang on one quick moment. Apologies, I was still in grab sound from the wider area around me, so I guess that plane flying overhead was kind of pertinent. It certainly was to my own conscious thoughts, and was the reason why I was willing to switch up to discussing why it is I'm trying to give a bit of a prehistory towards, I guess, my life, which I considered, I've studied alternative medicine. I got to hang out with the hippies, studying naturopathy at Southern Cross University, and it was quite amazing because to turn up at a university to study medicine, to require the same amounts of, I guess, intellect that is needed to be doing a health degree. We're not talking here a crunchy naturopathy on the weekends type thing and money will get you into the course. This course had requirements. In fact, they took it a step further. They wouldn't just take people out of school because, and it was pretty good reasoning, was that the head of the course had said basically children aren't ready to heal, and that we generally look towards people who have aged a bit in life and have had a chance to do some self-reflection or some healing on their own path. And I mean, that certainly was the case, and it was a course of the most amazing and diverse group of people I think I'd ever met, and in part because of the respective spiritualities or the respective alternative healing modalities that every individual in the course had travelled through on their path to turn up at this course. So it was a wonderful wealth of knowledge and a great communal mind share. Technologies, if you will, ways of living. And so, having found myself on a healing path through all of my life, certainly in my teenage years, going always, the only shop that interested me in the mall was the hippie shop that sold the crystals and the self-help books, So, in my early 20s, meeting the future mother of my child, a few years before we committed to starting a family. And strangely enough, I guess by personality, she was recognised by everyone in the course. It kind of nobody, if all the fish in the fish tank just didn't swim near that fish. All right, in hindsight, it's very telling to me. But I say this as a way to put dirt on another human being, and that's, of course, is not true. It's at all, my compassion towards others is such that I would certainly not in a public channel care to do that. But today it's my story. And so my perspective is that my child has been deeply corrupted by the interest of the mother of my child to only focus on money. She'd turned up on that course because her adage was to be a naturopath in New York. She was from America, and to be a naturopath in New York was worth, in her eyes, $1,800 an hour. And so, unlike every other person who'd turned up there with a requirement as difficult as a medical degree to get in, but to choose to receive a wage a lot less than anyone in medicine, everybody else was there for the service of humanity. The common thread of everybody in the course was that of the nicest people I'd ever met outside of church groups. these certainly were the sort of people that you would quite happily leave your child, even if you'd not met them per se. The common thread of being there and studying quite qualified that they were the sort of people you could leave your child with and be very, very safe. So, quite legitimately, I was kind of dating the shark. The person who worshipped at the Temple of Money. And many years down the track, with having had many partners and many children, I've come to learn just how deep that rabbit hole goes. And sadly, the influence on my child, and possibly through her partners that she's been with, all being quite angry about being disempowered and having an oldest child that they were potentially raising that wasn't theirs, has led to just some silly lessons, I guess, for my child in growing up. And I would see it. I know when my child was 6 or 7, and I'd travelled across my own country, probably about 16,000 kilometres worth of travel for my child, just to always be alive, to always try to have a better life for them. But whenever the mother would move, I would follow suit. Much to the chagrin of the mother, it would be like, well, just get a stable job. You know, she's always saying, with regards to me closing my businesses down, to follow that, oh, you never stick out your businesses. It's like, well, yeah, I don't. The number one thing to me is the raising of my child. Full stop. Nothing else matters. So she's got legitimate reasons to be upset with me, I suppose, all through the upbringing. And I don't want to sound like the deadbeat dad. I actually was the primary carer of my child for basically a decade, with just about zero support from the mother. She would take my child 4 times a year and generally be quite malleable on those dates, so that they were by far less than what we would organise consistently. Very much to the point where it didn't feel like she had any interest to be in my child's life, and that was okay. My daughter was a daddy's guy. Ever since she was born, I'd always paid interest, creative interest and fun interest, and an exchange and play right from day one. Always met her learning needs even before she could speak. She'd learnt all sorts of ways to communicate with hand and to have her learning needs met. You know, it was just fantastic. So very, very intelligent child. Across a few different of the intelligence fields, I would argue. But yeah, to say that the mother and I we don't really get on. And I'm a little bit disappointed. Okay, so I'll just redress this now, so I don't feel like it has to be about money and coming back and forward. But a couple of years ago now, my child left my care. Technically, I'd kicked them out. Not really. The argument was, why don't you measure the distance to go to school from your mother's house? And it was because we'd, as a family, that is, my partner and myself, had found it impossible to work with this child. For years, she'd not cleaned a room and not done a chore and not done a single thing asked of them. And at this point, we were house-sitting somebody else's cat, and we desperately needed the door to be kept closed. And my child, being only interested in antics that fit them, wasn't either leaving the internal door open to the cat tray or wasn't leaving an external door shut to keep the cat in. And it had led... I was just frustrated. I'd been particularly sick that week, and I had no energy. And in fact, I think I'd had both a broken arm and a broken leg in a small amount of time, such that I was essentially a bit of a cripple. I literally... And I'm sorry if that's not PC, or I'm minimising a term that for others it might be permanent. That my healing is such that, well, obviously I'm walking around now and I can use both my hands. So it took me many years, and I still don't have much strength. I can't open a fridge door with my right arm consistently, I find. Wouldn't want to do it 3 times in a row. So at this stage I was run down, I was quite sick, and my child still wasn't, in the servitude of others, something which I think is quite important, seemed incapable of maintaining a back door to be closed to keep a cat that we were house sitting, who didn't have reference for anywhere but suburbs away where they'd grown up and where their parent, who was now in Canberra, 4,000 kilometres away. So if the cat had gotten out, it was going to be just too much of a nightmare for me to have to... something I just wasn't going to be capable of handling. And in the process of trying to say to my child, well, okay, if you can't follow the most basic of basic rules, right? And so we were just getting bored of all the good foods being eaten out of the pantry, even if they weren't like my child's to eat. There was just no level of care. There was no level of parenting that I could do. And I certainly wasn't being listened to. And so I'd threatened a couple of months prior to that if you can't do your homework, or just the most basic of things, right? I had no ground whatsoever. I said, look, knowing in the modern world as a parent, you can't hit your child. Far out. When I was growing up, a good solid whacker. The love I had for my nan, who became the mother figure in my life through most of my life. If she talked to me sternly, the emotional engagement that I felt towards my nan would be such that, wow, I would never want to disappoint you again, ever. Like, behaviour changed, full stop. Don't have to ask a second time. So, with my child not having any method to instill a change in their behaviour, I'd threatened a couple of months before that, saying, well, look, I'll take the door, man. I'll take the door off your room, right? The convenience of having your iPad on till 3 in the morning, being on the net, I think, then getting to school late the next day. And we'd travelled many hundreds of kilometres to get into a very specific school. My partner threw in her property that she lived on, and her family, quick to take that offer. So my partner gave up 88 acres of land and her own life. She'd worked hard all of her life as a cleaner and built up an empire or a kingdom unto herself, and she threw that in to continue to live with me. And so we're renting quite expensive price points to get into a suburb where this school was. And my child wasn't turning up, was just casually in the morning, like waking up quite late, and I got a bit bored of that. And so I threatened to take the door off as one of those methods to control the behaviour. And she just took off to the other parents' house. First time ever, stayed there for a week. It's like, what the hey? No control whatsoever, and no discussion further on, and she still didn't clean a room, right? And it was just the whole, I could see that her behaviour was that of a person who was being depressed. And partly these poor sleep cycles, partly these poor eating cycles, partly the refuse to be with the family and watch a movie with us or do anything, was all being reinforced, and there was just no level of engagement we could break through this. And it just amazed me, because I'd done years of psychology, years of counselling, years of my multifaceted hats to handle these situations, and especially given that my child apparently was a bit of a daddy's girl, was generally would listen to me, but not really. And I can get onto what the issues were, starting from preteen. And it was the constant nurturing and being a yes person, right? That it literally was the undoing of this child's personality, this need to always make them feel right. In hindsight, it was completely incorrect. And I'd spent many years, from early teenage years, trying to say, look, don't lawyer your family. Don't always be right. Don't manipulate these conversations. It's very tiring for your family members. And I kept trying to warn, even before they were 16, like, you can still change this behaviour. It's not set. Like, it's going to be very hard unless you own the house you live in. Your housemates won't put up with this. Your workmates won't put up with this. You'll have to be the person in HR. You'll have to be that nasty workmate that makes everyone else quit and that you stay on the job. And kept trying to warn that the dangers of becoming this personality that just has to win every outcome, has to be right always. And all of this, of course, while I was supporting a child doing nothing at all for themselves or for others. So, yeah, in hindsight, the fault is with me, I know that. But I won't back down, right? So this is the most important thing to me. As much as I love my child, and my child ahead of anything on this planet, and would love to tell my child how wonderful they are completely, right now their beef with me is that I won't back down, I won't apologise. And it's like, it's just another tirade. To them, it's just another yes. It's just another, you're right. And it's another validation for all of the pain and hardship they get to whinge to their friends about. And like, legitimately, anyone that knows me as this alternate hippie type parent that's just been so time focused and so bend over backwards to do anything for my child all my life. And it's just like, oh, your child must have turned out so wonderful, right? The amount of times in public, total strangers would just say, wow, the way you engage with this child is just fantastic. Total strangers, always. That was nearly a daily event, was to have some random stranger always say, wow, the due diligence and the care that you put in for this child is just amazing. I can assure you, I nurtured a monster, right? Loving monster, right? Just like any human being, filled with compassion, filled with the desire for love, but using their God-given tools for anything but societal uplift. Very self-centered, very, I would argue, selfish. Anyway, I'm not prepared to back down, as much as it's silly. Like, don't get me wrong, I forgive my child. I guess if there's a forgiveness dialogue, I forgive myself for being the hard-ass parent? No, I don't really. I'd much rather see my child on a daily basis. But I also believe that somebody in their life needs to show the comeuppance of, you can't behave this way. And so as a good parent, I kind of have to stick to my guns. Anyway, don't know. I'm prepared to be a dumb monkey. I'm prepared to get it wrong. Certainly prepared to try. Anyway, the first attempt to parent, to put the brakes on and say, well, no, this is unacceptable, was the threat of removing a door, which I never did, of course. I don't want to remove the privacy from a child. But no, they took off to the mum's house for a whole week and then came back. And it's just like the typical time. Any child that leaves home, after the first time they leave home, they come back, and the parents are usually then willing to be quite malleable on all the sorts of things that they previously weren't. And it wasn't that we had any lockdowns in place. We'd never discussed the door thing again, realistically, pretty much until the day that she left. And I had asked her to leave. I said, why don't you, because it was a Sunday night, and I said, why don't you go to the other parent's house, which was 2 hours away? Why don't you travel to school from the other parent's house? Why don't you see the benefit of living here, such that if you're not going to be a child, I get that, I can't parent you. If you choose that you won't do a single thing I ask, fair enough. But if you're going to be here as a housemate, there are some basic requirements, right? And if you can't play those games of living in accordance with, say, basic house rules, then I put to you tonight, why don't you go to your mum's house and travel to school from there in the morning? Now, of course, the school that she was going to would send messages out when the kids didn't make it on time or turn up at all. And to say that going to the mum's house didn't suit the studies timetable. But I mean, she'd stopped studying and stopped turning up at classes anyway, and she'd gone from all the brainiac classes to all the completely un-brainiac classes, and she'd managed to find a way to not do, like, I think math full stop in like a senior 2 years, or like a lot of the prerequisites for any uni course. And the principal of the school was going through individually and checking in with students to be like, well, look, there's been a couple of failings in the timetables. Like, we need students to do certain prerequisites, certain things are just required as part of the school level. And my child managed to not do that. I mean, seriously, my child was winning at a university level all sorts of debate team type stuff. We're talking here a sharp, very, very sharp mind, very, very lawyer mind, very capable of winning every argument. And this is the problem, that as a parent, you need to be able to be the authority figure. And when a child in the modern world when there's no way to enforce an utmost level of authority, a zenith level grade, a raising of the stakes in a game of cards or something, there's no level to trump a child in the modern world. And the reason I give this video will ultimately, I hope, be a thought or a rumination. The problem is that this is going on en masse all over the planet, and that we are empowering a generation of children to have such a voice, but they're unemployable, as every my family runs a lot of businesses, a lot of my uncles and whatnot. And they've always given me the feedback that beyond a certain point in time, basically they give a date. As anyone born after that date's just unemployable. And I don't know how true that is, but it has certainly been my experience when, as a customer going into shops, the lack of resilience in the younger generation. In fact, even as a grown adult, I've found myself, as a child I would do a lot of technical-based jobs. As a young adult, I was always doing jobs that would lean on my mind. But as a grown adult, just trying to cover the rent, to live in a ritzy suburb near a school that my child needed to go to. I've done food court jobs, slinging Mexican. I've done the Domino's, making the pizza dough. I've done the car audio install, the cleaning jobs, car detailing jobs, you name it, right? And my child doesn't respect me at all. Apparently, all the attitudes of the mother, right? So it's amazing if just one parent is feeding pure poison, how the attitude or the social identity of a growing or developing spirit or soul can be so heavily impacted. They say, would you do it again? Well, okay, most of my life I would do again. But in terms of choosing the mother of my child, it wouldn't just be for their DNA, right? The nurturing capability of the environment that we bring to a child is so important. The problem is that we've taken it too far, right? This whole world is too soft, too empowering to these children, with no fear of consequence, none of the basic stuff that nature itself instills in every living organism. And so, in terms of the speed that humanity is just marching off a cliff, it's just ridiculous, right? Like, we can say, oh yeah, but at the boardroom level, everything's paint by numbers and everything's just about pushing money uphill. But that's at one end of the organisation. At the other end, right, is the induction of the HR department, and they've got to employ people. And whilst everyone's been tightening their belts for the last few decades, that is, that every business is trying to lower its costs, and attrition is such a high cost. The losing of staff, and rehiring of staff, and training of staff, and getting them up to a grade or a skill that we already had on the floor is a large time and cost investment. But it can't be met, right? So these businesses, the old fogies at the top who haven't had to rub shoulders ever with a modern millennial, they're out of touch, right? They're not necessarily out of touch with the markets they're operating in. They're out of touch with the pillars or the foundation of their business. And the joke, even 20 years ago, that I was made very aware of was that some of the largest businesses on the planet, for their front of house, will have the least trained staff member imaginable. And that we saw the parallel as we went into the digital world, where web pages for some of the biggest companies on the planet could be very basic. They hadn't cottoned on yet to the value of the digital front end. Because two people in a garage with the most amateur business on the planet could have a better web page. And by presentation, it was like having a master of ceremonies, or the world's best concierge on the door for front of house service. And so everything in the modern world has just become about manipulate and hoodwink, if you will, the suspension and disbelief, the magic trick of make them look left while the show goes on the right, ever so briefly, just out of frame. And so, as a parent, right, like literally, a little bit heartbreaking for me, I was told via message last night that my child will not go into a house with me alone. And they'd written this long message. It was designed to roll me up so that I would cancel meeting today, as I've been unable to make appointments with them. And they use lies and manipulations every step of the way. They're trying to make out like, oh, you didn't book soon enough. On the same day, they were willing to meet me so long as they only had to come just down the road, that I would travel for over the hour to get there. But they could just walk, just out of their apartment and just come down the road. And then they cancelled that day on the basis of, oh no, you hadn't organised it early enough. I need at least a day's notice. And it's like, well, those messages I was giving you yesterday. But we've had this shenanigans now for 2 years of meeting up, and I'll be patiently waiting somewhere, and I'll get the message after meet-up time of like, oh yeah, I'm not turning up today. And then the child quotes me from like about a month ago saying that they had this emotional reach out, and I responded 2 days later with a smiley face going, I love you. And it's because I can only message my child, and generally I don't get any response over days of time. And it's just become painful or hurtful. And they never get followed up on, and then it's all this nonsense. And so about a month or so ago, this child wrote some message along the lines like they finally sounded like they wanted to hook up with me. And I was like, well, in my heart I didn't believe it. Right? My attitude, if they actually wanted that, they would have followed up with further messages and stuff. It just felt like another ego boosting, like, oh yeah, I've said the things I needed to say so that I can build up a story I can tell my friends type thing. And so I politely responded a couple of days later with a smile, smiley face, something I'm not into emojis or whatever. And they mock me. And part of their big essay to me last night was I'm reaching out. I've been, in years, it's been years now, blah, blah, blah. The child that left and never came back. Legit, left. On that night, they were sick. And I said, oh, look, you're sick. You got a couple of young children at the other house. Personally, I think it would be very poor form to take this sickness into that house. But you're going to do whatever you want to do. And I'd taken the iPad off them the day before and their headphones. And I fully well knew that they were going to leave so they could take them, right? The only reason they'd engaged with me that day was on the basis of getting that iPad. And when they said 20 minutes later that they were leaving, yeah, funny that. I said, well, don't take your iPad. I'll be pretty disappointed. And the child looked me in the eye and went, I know. And then walked out the front door. And then, of course, I went and walked to check the iPad and their headphones, and they were missing. And I rang her up. She made the bus stop. I said, I'm not impressed. Oh, dear. But, I mean, that's me being a hard parent, right? And that child did whatever they wanted and got everything they wanted and has reframed things in hindsight so that they're the victim. Anyway, apparently I kicked them out. That was it. I never saw him again. The mother had managed to come up with a case where apparently they were living. I got stuck with all the school fees and everything, and I wasn't getting the requisite support for all the years that she wasn't in the child's life, like 18% or like 15%, something pathetically low, less than 20% on a yearly basis. But we were saying to the Australian government that she was in the child's life 35% or something ridiculous, so that apparently, she wouldn't have to pay me any money. She just didn't want... That was the only thing she cared about. She didn't care about the fact that when she left town that she'd moved to 4,000 kilometres away from where I was living. And I'd moved out to this crappy little country town where she told everybody before I got there how much of a dropkick I was. The amount of people I'd meet at barbecues going, oh, I was told you were a real wanker, but you're a really nice guy. And I was quite community orientated. And a super nice guy, and everyone came to realise that really quickly, based on the first time they'd meet me. And it was pretty obvious that one person's a compulsive liar and makes up any story and justifies any story. And my child has learnt a lot of skill set. It suits their lawyer brain of hold on to facts that serve your purpose and reframe them and remove context and do everything you can, because you can tell a good story. People love to listen to stories. Hope so. Hope this one's been somewhat interesting. It's been a long one. My internet bandwidth will be stolen, uploading gigabytes of data that I don't feel anyone will ever listen to. I hope it's been cathartic for myself. Maybe I can go home now and make the coffees for the remaining family members, and I really just need to get some sleep, I feel. But yeah, I've certainly been played all my life by my family. I've lost all my inheritance. I was assured of certain things. My partner's lost all of their inheritance. We're now about to sell up every item we've got just to buy the world's worst motorhome. Any tent on wheels will do us. Get on a road and we're going to head off to just going to trust in God's path, really. I've got a destination in mind. I feel it's been given to me. feel very zany. It's very, very hard to step so shakily. I feel like a newborn calf. I don't have 4 feet though. And I'm balancing precariously, but we just don't know what the next step is going to be. It's the Indiana Jones leap of faith step at the end of Last Crusade, where he's stepping out into an invisible bridge. And we've just got to do it. We are literally just going to not knowing our future and what it brings. And it's really good after 2 years of not having contact with my child. This last message has been right at a time where I've been looking at moving 4,000 kilometres away. And then to have this message, like everything comes together. It's just like, oh, good. So I'm free then. I don't need to continue to linger in this area on the basis that you might come back. I don't need to rent a big, expensive house in between all the universities in the city. I've been paying very low rent. I always kind of figured that my daughter and their partner would take over the house when my missus and I went on the road. I mean, it's still a rental, but the rent rate was good and it's in a perfect location. So, dear, it's very freeing. And that's the thing, is that I do believe everything happens for a reason. If there's been any worth in this video, if anybody out there has continued to listen on because they themselves have been a parent or they themselves have been a child, maybe not if you're the child in a relationship where you feel you've been hard done by. Right? And there's a lot of people out there legit, and we can always hold on to our pain, and our pain is legitimate, right? But one of the things that's really nice about becoming a parent is being able to look back on the things that your parents did that you might not have understood, and just having more compassion for them. Right? I've got a lot more compassion for my mother as a 16-year-old. Well, I think she was 18 when she had me. But I have a lot more understanding for the difficulties of her life after I became a parent. And I really enjoyed being the sole parent, arguably. Well, I had a new partner on the scene, helping me every step of the way. And so my servitude for them is infinite, right? I really look forward to being able to get them out of the redneck state that I'm in, the mining state. There's not a lot of peace, love and happiness. It is all about the money over here. There's no customer service. It was all the miners set up businesses with all their money and didn't know how to train customer service. It just let anybody run it however it went on. And it was only after the massive property boom about 15 years ago, maybe started 20 years ago, but it's only after that there's been an influx of talent from elsewhere around the country that's actually raised the potential for equality of customer service. And now we've had generationally some of that being trained onto other people, and so it's bit by bit been coming up, but it's not really a soft state. And so I look forward to possibly getting out there on the road again, meeting people more in alignment with the vision of how we'd like to live our lives. I must admit, I like to sell silver fabrics, the sorts of things that stop the wavelength hitting our body, hitting our cells. Non-ionising radiation, as they say it is. The problem is that it excitates the cells in a way that before mobile phones and everything, Wi-Fi, and we bathed in it all day, every day, Bluetooth, all day, every day, was those cells would only be excitated about 3 times in a day, about once every 8 hours. And now it's like triple figures per infinitely small amount of time. And so they don't get a sleep state or a rest state, which is when they would typically heal, or the way the body would operate is very different. So they can say, oh, look at these studies on these genome perfect mice where we spent more money on the sample mice than we did on the scientists who ran the study, basically. And even in those genome perfect samples, they were just riddled with tumours, riddled with them. But because it wasn't the point of the study, the findings weren't put in the 60-page document. And this is the document everyone quotes, that phones don't hurt us. It's like, oh no, the evidence as done by the US military, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, yeah, has anyone actually read the study? Oh my Lord, right? But there's no profit in showing the fallibilities of these things, right? Generally, you pay for research studies when it's going to set you up to make money, not... and our health authorities don't aren't ever vigilant. Dare I say, our agricultural board here in Australia is given a huge amount of money by a company starting with M. It's not McDonald's. They're known for GM. That's not good modifications, I tell you. And it's crazy. Like, it's only for export, is our GM here in WA. But we had an organic farmer that his crops were cross-fertilised, as is the case. As is, this M company wants organics classified such that but our products are always going to cross-fertilise, even though we strip the ability for second generational growth of our products, right? The nature of nature growing the way nature grows is that we basically, our products are going to destroy nature as we know it, and we all know this. But yeah, the investments that they can put into our health bodies kind of makes us feel like everyone just turns a blind eye. So to say that I care to be a conscientious consumer is an understatement. To say that my motivations in life is to bring health, bring wisdom, bring happiness, joy to others, but with one foot in the reality, right? I'd like to be in reality. I'd like my words to have weight and meaning to someone. So look, I didn't mean to talk over anyone where I was like, oh yeah, if you're just a teenager suffering pain, you don't need to leave a comment. Anybody is welcome to leave a comment. I'd be more than happy to address topics as they come up. I do assure most people out there that their parents love them, doing the best with the tools they've got at the time. And well wishes with you. Much love.